Hi dear students, our today's topic is exception and exception handling in Java. Let me just do that. Yes. Okay, so exception in a program is not an error. It's actually any unprecedented event that may occur during normal execution of a program, and it halts your program. It disrupts the normal flow of a program. Exception is never an error, either syntactical or logical, but it could be any event, any unfortunate event that may occur during the execution of your program. For example, when you're printing documents on a printer and it runs out of paper or toner, that is never an error. Rather, it's an exception, and it could be handled by inserting more papers or changing the toner of the printer. Another example of exception may occur when you're trying to access an index of the array that is never present. For example, the size of the array is actually 5 and the indexes are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But at some point, you are mistakenly trying to access index 6 or 7. Since it doesn't exist, your program will generate an exception. Third example of exception is when you're writing to a file or reading from a file, but that file doesn't exist on your computer or on the address that you've given, so it will generate an exception. There is a mechanism these exceptions are handled by programming languages. Java provides a proper structure to handle any and all exceptions in order to maintain normal flow of the program. Java has a class of exception, and with that class there are actually a whole hierarchy of classes that we have. For example, as you can see here in this diagram, we've got a parent class exception, and with that we've got two child classes, checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. Now let's just discuss what checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions mean. Checked exceptions. These are all the exceptions that are checked by your editor, Java editor, during program writing time and or compilation time. For example, and of course, your editor is going to generate an error message about all these exceptions in order to inform you about it. For example, one of the checked exceptions is a class not found exception. Now, I could give you a very good example of it. Let's say you are trying to instantiate the object of a scanner class, but you haven't imported the scanner class in your program. So you will get the class not found exception in your program. Another very good example of checked exception is the instantiation exception. Instantiation exception occurs when you're trying to create an object of the abstract class or the interface class, just like the one we've seen in our previous video when I was trying to create the object of an abstract class in main. During my program writing, program wasn't executed at all, but when I was writing the program, Java started giving me error messages about it. So because I'm not allowed to create any object of the abstract class or interface classes, that's why it was giving me an instantiation exception. Another example of checked exceptions, all those exceptions that are checked during writing the code or during compilation time, is no such method exception. If you guys remember, in our first lab, I gave you a program and asked you to write a code that asks user to enter an option to do various to perform various functions. Now, you guys were writing a code on trying to access a method called next character in the scanner class, but that function never existed in the scanner class. So what happened was it was giving you guys the error, and then we came to know that there is no such method called next character in the scanner class. Rather, we have to use scanner object dot next function dot character at and at the index. We have to give the index to get a character input. So these are all the examples of checked exceptions that are checked before compilation of the program, when you're writing the program, or when you're compiling it. Before execution of a program. Now, the other type of exception is called unchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions are all that are checked during runtime. These are probably more disastrous than the checked exceptions because they will put your program at a halt and will stop executing any more codes or any more line of codes. There is a whole list of unchecked exceptions that we as a programmer have to take care of. For example, there is an arithmetic exception. It occurs. It's an error that occurs when you are dividing a number by 0. Or there is another very famous exception called the array index out of bounds exception. It occurs when you are trying to access an index which is not present. And then we have another very good exception that I was going to share with you. That was a number format exception, yes. When you're trying to convert an integer to a string, or a string to an integer, that will give you a number format exception. So we can discuss all these one by one. I have actually a few scenarios of the exceptions to discuss with you. This definitely is an arithmetic exception. This will occur when you're trying to divide a number by 0. In mathematics, we'll write infinity, but computer cannot store infinity in a variable. The other type of exception was a null pointer exception. For example, you've got a string variable, store null in it. Now you're trying to print the length of this string variable. Actually, whatever string you have stored in S, you're trying to print the length of that string. This will generate a null pointer exception because you have a null value in a variable and you're trying to perform an operation on that variable. This is a number format exception. As I've told you before, we've got a string and we are trying to convert that string into an integer using the parsing method of the integer class and trying to save it in an integer variable I. This will generate a number format exception. Array index out of bounds exception, as we've discussed it already. We've got an array. We're trying to access an index that is never present, or for example here, the program will run. It will ask us to enter values. It will enter 5 values, but whenever we get on the 5th index, this will generate the error. Okay, so probably by now you may have an idea of what an exception is. An exception is not a logical or a syntactical error, but it is an unprecedented and unforeseen event that may occur during the execution of a program, and it will halt your program. Whenever an exception occurs, what Java normally does is it creates the object of an exception class or a specific type of exception class. It binds the information about the exception generated with that object and throws the object. Now, our responsibility as programmer is actually to handle that exception properly so that normal flow of our program continues. If we handle the exception properly, our program will continue to execute. If we do not handle the exception generated, your program will print out the exception description and terminate the normal execution of the program. No more lines of code will be executed after an execution occurrence. Okay, so Java exception handling actually depends upon 5 keywords. Of mostly we use try, catch, and finally. There are these 2 keywords as well, throw and throws. We'll discuss them later, but in detail we are going to learn about try and catch. The try statement allows you to define a block of code to be tested for errors while it's being executed. So when you're writing a code and as a programmer you think that the specific line of code that you've written may generate an exception at any point or at any instance in time, you just enclose that problematic line of code in the try block. And for every try, we've got a catch. Catch is actually the exception handler. It will catch the exception that has been raised by the statement in try block, and it will handle that exception and then continue the normal flow of the program. Try and catch keywords come in pair. There may be multiple catch statements available for a try block. So now what we are going to do is we're going to execute a program and see what exception actually looks like. I hope you can see this program. Here I've got 3 integers, a, b, and answer, and all of them are initialized to 0, just to remove any garbage. Then we've got a scanner class. And now I'm asking user to enter value in A, I'm asking user to enter value in B, I'm dividing A over B and storing the result in answer, and then I am printing the value of answer. So let's just execute this program once and see what happens. Okay, let's go to the compilation point. Oh, it stopped. It didn't execute, I guess. Let me press play again. Okay, now it's asking me to enter A. So this line is executed. Whenever I enter a value, say 8, and I hit enter, it is asking me to enter B now. When I enter, say 2, and I hit enter, 8 will be divided over 2. The result will be stored in answer variable and answer will be printed. So it's giving me a 4. Normal flow of the program is never halted. It is completely executed. Now let's introduce an exception, an arithmetic exception in this case. So it's asking me to enter A. I enter 8. Now it's asking me to enter B. I enter 0 this time. So as soon as I hit enter key, it has divided 8 over 0, couldn't store the answer infinity in the answer variable, and it has created an generated an exception. Except it says exception in thread main, exception in function main has occurred, and the type of exception is actually arithmetic exception. Now what kind of an arithmetic exception is that? It's a division by 0 error. So I have to check it. This means that this line was okay, even this line was okay, but if somebody, any of your users, enters 0 in B, then this line over here is going to give you an exception. So what we do is we enclose the problematic line of code in the try block, and we give a catch for it. The catch block accepts the arithmetic exception class, and we are going to create an object of it. So this means, let me just complete the code first. Source out dot print line, print line. Yep. And I write, please do not. It's a division by 0 error. And please do not enter 0 for B. Okay. Now, what's going on with this code now? We had a problematic line of code. We enclosed it in try. This line may generate an error. What kind of an error would that be? What kind of an exception would that be? It will be an arithmetic exception. This arithmetic exception will be caught by catch block. And there is an object of it. This object can later on be used for doing any sorts of printing any sorts of messages as well. So I inform the user that you cannot enter a 0 in B. Okay, now let's see what happens this time. Enter A, I enter 8. Enter B, I enter 0 this time. Okay, now it's giving me an error called it's a division by 0 error. Please do not enter 0 for B. So an exception was generated. Exception was caught by catch block. The error message was printed. And the rest of the program went on as it should have been. It only printed 0 in place of answer. Okay, so let's just explore something. What kind of methods do we get with the arithmetic exception object? I just want to write AE dot. We've got a method called getMessage. Here, if we write this, then let's see what it prints. A 0. So if I don't want to write any message for user, I can simply use the arithmetic exceptions object to print the message for me. So whenever I wrote AE.getMessage, it simply wrote division by 0. The kind of the message or the exception that actually occurred, this object contains all the information about it. Okay, there is another important. Okay, we can just play around with this object and try and print anything we want. You can try printing the print stack trace method, and you can see what it prints for you. So this was all about arithmetic exception, how exceptions are handled, how they are generated. Now we've got another example here. If you could see, I've got an array of size 5. I'm asking user to enter values in the array, and I'm asking I've used this loop 6 times, since the array has 5 values, it has 5 locations, only 5 values can be entered. Whenever I try and enter a 6th value in the array, it will generate an exception here, because the array of 5 doesn't exist, so it will generate an index out of bounds exception, and it will print this message for me. So let's just try and see what this code is doing. Play. Oh, it's executing this program. Let me just close it. Okay, now I hit play. Enter value. So it's asking me to enter array value. I enter 2, another value 3, 4, 5, 6. So these are actually 5 values. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But since my loop is running for 6th time as well, so it's asking me to enter another value. I enter a 7. Now let's see what happens. When the loop terminated, the 7 that I had entered did not get saved in the array, and still an exception occurred. The message displayed was index exceeds the limit, and the rest of the program went on properly. It only printed the values of the array. So this is how exception works. I hope you've got the general idea of exception handling, how to use try and catch. Now let's just go through the rest of our slides here. Okay. We've learned about try, we've learned about catch. Now the third block that comes with the exception handling is called finally. Finally block is used when you want to execute a few lines of codes and no matter if exception occurs or not, but you really want those lines of code to be executed at any cost, then you put those lines in the finally block. It allows the programmer to avoid having cleanup code accidentally bypassed by a return statement or a break statement. So finally is sometimes very helpful, and when we come to the lecture of file handling, you'll see that we will enter all the important cleanup code in the finally block. Then we've got this throw and throws. A throw statement allows you to create a custom error. Let me just skip through to a program. Yeah, so we've got a class here, an example class, and in main function we create the object of the class. We call its function called check age. So what this program is doing, if you could just go through this program, you'll know what it's doing. If somebody is underage, I want them to know that they're not eligible for voting or for visiting this site or for doing anything with this program. So if you enter your age, a check age method is executed if you're underage. So this exception will occur, and this is used with the throw keyword. This keyword will throw an exception if this condition is met, and will give you this error message. Otherwise, the normal flow of the program will continue. Then we've got a throws keyword. Throws keyword is used with methods. If you think that one of your methods will throw an arithmetic exception, you just inform the compiler about that method. This method might throw an arithmetic exception, and that exception should be handled. So here's the exception. You're trying to divide 15 with 0. If division by 0 occurs, an arithmetic exception will be thrown. That will be caught here, and error message will be displayed. So you can try this in your compiler. I hope you guys do understand. If there are any issues or problems with exception handling, you can always message me on our classes WhatsApp group.